Hello and welcome to the top heirloom tomatoes for the Hudson Valley. This webinar is brought to you by gardeningthehudsonvalley.com and I'm Maria Iannotti. I'll be your host today. I'm so glad you joined me here and I am so delighted that so many people are interested in growing heirloom tomatoes. We here in the Hudson Valley have our share of tomato pests and problems, but we can still grow some really delicious varieties here. I know that whenever I talk to other vegetable gardeners, the conversation always comes back to tomatoes, which ones are earliest, which ones are dependable or disease resistant. Maybe that's because the Hudson Valley and the Northeast in particular does not really provide ideal tomato growing conditions. We may have a very, very hot summer, or maybe not. We may have a very dry summer or maybe not, but we can pretty much be assured we will have humidity. So fungal diseases will always be a threat no matter what type of tomato we're growing. But water can be supplemented and heat intensifies tomato sugar, so don't let that stop you. We can still have an abundant, delicious harvest with just a little TLC. And if you've heard that heirloom tomatoes are more difficult to grow than hybrid tomatoes, well, please take that with a grain of salt too. It is true many hybrids have been bred to be resistant to some of the many, many, many diseases we have to be on guard for, but there are some pretty tough heirlooms too, and they tend to be all the more delicious. The real trick to growing great tomatoes is choosing varieties suited to your area, and that's what this series of slides is all about. So without further ado, here are my top 10 heirloom tomatoes to grow and eat in the Hudson Valley. We're going to start with this little lovely girl, Anna Russian. Anna may be Russian, but she holds up to hot weather too, no vapors for her. She's what's called an ox heart tomato. Now, I've never seen an ox heart, but I'm told that this is the general shape that gave this type of tomato its name. Nothing to do with flavor, thank goodness. You might notice that the leaves are a little bit wispy. The vines themselves tend to be a little less than robust. Maybe they're holding on all their reserves on to make wonderfully sweet tomatoes, but the vines themselves do not seem to impact the flavor of these tomatoes. This is a very early tomato, coming in about 65 days from transplant, and if you've grown early tomatoes before and been disappointed by their less than robust flavors, trust me, Anna Russian has a nice, rich tomato juiciness that you will be pleased to have and be able to enjoy so early in the season. Anna Russian seeds were given to Greg LeHoulier, a man whose name we're going to hear a lot throughout this presentation. He's the famed South Carolina tomato man. He was given the seeds by a woman who had gotten the seeds from her grandfather, who had gotten the seeds from a friend from Russia. And this is a very typical heirloom story. It's how someone brought the seeds with them when they immigrated, and how something so delicious gets passed around and enjoyed by others. Because there are so many seeds out there at this point, if these vegetables were not remarkable, no one would bother to go through the fuss of saving them and sharing them. Anna Russian is a workhorse plant that handles cool temperatures, hot temperatures, gives you blemish-free fruits, starts producing early in the season, and continues on for a really nice, productive harvest. Not so early, but equally delicious, is Aunt Ruby's German Green. She takes about 80 days to start producing, but she's worth the wait. Most of the bigger tomatoes do come in at a later time. Ruby Arnold of Tennessee discovered this amazingly plump tomato. Ruby, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but seeds of her discovery have been well maintained. This is an extremely popular tomato. The green tomatoes, I think, were initially very popular because they were a novelty, but the ones that have stuck around and become standards, you can trust that they're here because of their flavor. This is a very good sized tomato with fruits averaging up to about a pound, and they grow in clusters of 2 or 3. Now, green tomatoes in general, tomatoes that don't turn red even when they're ripe, they tend to have a fruity flavor. Aunt Ruby's German Green has a nice juicy balance of sugar and acid, which gives the fruity flavor a little hint of, spice. It's a little tricky judging when green tomatoes are ripe and ready to enjoy, but most will start to pick up a little yellow shading. I think you can see that at the bottom of this tomato. It still has green shoulders, but it's a little golden at the bottom. They also tend to get softer to the touch. There's a little give when you press gently with your thumb. And as with all tomatoes, the more ripe they get, the more of that delightful tomato aroma you'll be able to pick up. It's always best to bite into one to see if it's truly ripe. And although Aunt Ruby will remain green on the outside, there is a definite blush to the inner flesh when she's fully ripe. Aunt Ruby's German green has very good resistance to fungal diseases and holds up very well in our humid summers. Well, you knew I had to say Brandywine at some point. Truth be told, I don't have really good luck with the traditional brandy wines, the pink brandy wine. So while I haven't had great success with them, Brandywine OTV has lived up to my expectations, which were high. This is yet another of Greg LeHoulier's fantastic finds. There ought to be some kind of medal for this man. He has brought so much to the garden in the way of flavor and also dependability. It was originally a cross between a yellow brandywine and some mystery tomato. But LeHoulier and then later Carolyn Mayle stabilized the variety we enjoy today. Now the OTV stands for off the vine, as it should be. And this beauty weighs in at about a pound. They're red orbs with orange shoulders. They say the flavor of a brandy wine is undescribable, and I do recommend everybody try at least one. You'll probably want more. But try and imagine a melt in your mouth sweetness with just the right balance of acid kick and juicy fruitiness. I know, it's hard to describe. You just have to try one. Now, since Carolyn Mayle did her work near Albany, you can bank on this tomato doing well in our area. It is very disease resistant and dependable, as most of the ones here today are. If you haven't tried a brandy wine yet, or if you've had disappointments like I have, try one again. Try off the vine. Make sure you get exactly that seed when you order it. Ah, the black tomatoes. Okay, they're not really black, they're more of a dusky purple, but they do have an intense flavor. And this is my favorite, it's Cherokee purple. Now, the black tomatoes originated in the Crimean area of the Ukraine. You'll notice that a lot of the tomatoes I'm recommending are either from Eastern Europe or Russia itself, because we seem to share climatic conditions, and they have very short growing seasons, so we could pretty much guarantee that those tomatoes will have time to ripen in our gardens. In the Crimean area, I'm told they have baking hot summers, so the skin on the outside of the tomato darkens as a way to protect the inner flesh, and the heat concentrates the sugars, so you get that multi-sensory synergy of tart skin and sweet flesh, kind of like a plum. And that's what gives black tomatoes their unique flavor combination and what makes them so great for fresh eating, where you get a little bit of both flavor profiles in every bite. Cherokee purple is even more colorful than some black tomatoes. It has purple skin, but it has red flesh and green seed gel. Cherokee purple is said to have been grown by the Cherokee people. It's been in cultivation for at least 100 years, and it only received its current name in 1990 from our friend Craig LeHoulier, when he was given some seed from a neighbor whose family had passed them down for that 100 years that we know of. This is one of the least fussy tomatoes in my garden. It has very good disease resistant, fairly uniform 12-ounce fruits. Color does vary according to the season. There are a lot of great black tomatoes to try growing, so if you do find, like me, you enjoy growing them, there are a couple of others I would recommend. Black Krim, it's a little smaller, 4 to 6 ounces, but it does really well in very hot summers. Black from Tula is probably the heftiest of the black tomatoes, with 12 to 14 ounce fruits. Some gardeners prefer that flavor of black from Tula over Cherokee purple, but again, I don't find they grow quite as well in my garden. They sometimes crack before fully ripening. And one final one is Black Prince. This one is from Siberia. It's a little less smoky in flavor. It has more of that true tomato flavor, if that's what you're looking for. It's also great for cooking, coming in at 6 to 8 ounces. Now, druzhba. These are perfectly round, smooth fruits with a real blast of what you think of as tomato flavor and scent. Druzhba means friendship in Bulgarian. It's a Bulgarian tomato. They have, again, excellent disease resistance, very high yields. They aren't a huge tomato, but they're a respectable 10 ounces. The thing that's wonderful about them is they have that flavor that most people think of when they imagine a fresh from the vine tomato, that hearty, concentrated tomato goodness. They're great for fresh eating. I also like to use them in sauces, especially like the quick, barely cooked sauces. This is the tomato I recommend when someone tells me that they can't find a tomato that tastes like the ones they remember. It has that exactly what most people think of as that definitive tomato flavor. Give them a try, you won't be disappointed. One of the most popular heirloom legends is the tomato called Radiator Charlie's Mortgage Lifter. Radiator Charlie, whose real name was Marshall Biles, was a mechanic during the Great Depression. Charlie liked to dabble in his garden after work. He had started breeding tomatoes, and he bred one particularly large and delicious tomato that weighed in at 2.2 pounds each. He was sharing them with friends. Everybody loved them. They got a reputation. So he started saving some seeds, and next year he sold seedlings for $1 a piece. Legend has it that people were coming from hundreds of miles away to buy them, and in a short time Charlie was able to pay off his mortgage. Well, whether or not the legend is true, you can still purchase seeds from the tomato Charlie bred, and they do make a great slicer. I will admit I don't get a huge yield from each plant, but I'm not sure the plants could hold that many tomatoes of that size. But they aren't the record breaker tomato. The current largest tomato on record, a gentleman in Oklahoma holds the record. In 1986, he grew a tomato that was 7 pounds, 12 ounces. Whoa. Okay, when you think of great paste tomatoes, perhaps Poland doesn't come to mind. But once again, it is an Eastern European tomato that triumphs in Hudson Valley gardens. These are determinate plants, which means that they set and ripen their fruits over a short period of a few weeks, all their fruits at once. Excuse me. It's not an ideal type of plant if you want tomatoes for the whole season, but it is perfect if you want all of your tomatoes ready when you're ready to make sauce. Now, alpaca sacrifices nothing for its quick ripening. These are dense, meaty, oblong fruits with a really intense tomato flavor, and they grow in clusters of 5, 6, or more. I do have problems with the vines in humid summers, and when aren't they humid? They eventually succumb to some sort of leaf spotting, but not before they're able to ripen and sweeten the fruits, and after that, well, I can just pull them out and make room for a fall crop. Although they're good for fresh eating, alpaca really shines as a paste tomato. I was torn between recommending striped German or big rainbow. Now, both look like stained glass marble when sliced, and both have a wonderful blend of tomatoey flavor and yellow tomatoey fruitiness. But in the end, I'm suggesting striped German because it starts maturing a little earlier and it has a bigger overall yield. It's also less prone to cracking than big rainbow. These are very large slicers at 1 to 2 pounds each, and you won't get many maturing on a plant at any given time, but they do keep on coming. That is once they start setting fruit, which isn't until well into August, quite honestly. But once again, be patient. Good things, good tomatoes come to those who wait, and striped German is one of my summertime treats. Here's yet another Eastern European tomato that can more than handle our climate. I've always been told it's pronounced stupichka, but I've also heard it pronounced stupitz, however you say it. It's a delightful tomato that is early enough for the patience challenged among us, even in the Northeast. This is from Czechoslovakia. It's not a large tomato, but it's bigger than a cherry tomato. I say the fruits are kind of somewhere between a golf ball and a tennis ball, about 3 to 4 ounces each. Now, stupichka has several things going for it. First, it doesn't notice the weather. It doesn't care hot, cold, wet, dry. It just chugs along. And it starts churning out tomatoes in July and keeps going to frost. It is sweet and juicy and delightful, and I think the later in the season, the better tasting they get. Okay, and finally, this little jewel-like gem. It seems this is the tomato everyone's grandmother grew, and I wonder why people ever stopped growing them. I was surprised, though, at how long a season they needed, because despite the bite-sized tomatoes, these are really huge plants. But once you do start getting fruits, you will get clusters and clusters of these mild, sweet, bite-sized golden fruits that are very hard to stop snacking on. They're also really nice as a tomato preserve. Now, there are several small pear-shaped tomatoes, including red pear. Yellow pear owes its popularity to its very mild tomato flavor. That made it popular with young kids and very, very easy to snack on without really noticing how many you're eating. If you would prefer more tomato wallop, there's a similar pear-shaped a small tomato called yellow submarine. It's similar, as I said, in size and shape, but it has a much more beefy tomato taste. Oh, so there you have it. My top 10 heirloom tomatoes for the Hudson Valley. I hope I've made you a little hungry and a little eager to get out there and start growing some new tomatoes in your garden. For a printable list of this slideshow, just visit www.gardeningthehudsonvalley.com. I would also love to hear your suggestions for tomatoes to grow in our area. There's always room for more, isn't there? I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a terrific growing season. See you next time.